Welcome to Paul Weiss Waking Up with AI, a podcast from Paul Weiss featuring your host, Katherine Forrest. The only update you need on AI policy, law, and governance starts now.
Welcome back to Paul Weiss, Waking Up with AI. I'm Katherine Forrest.
And I'm Scott Caravello.
And Scott, I know that you need to talk about your Miami situation with yet another bachelor party, whatever it is that you do. But I need to vent for a moment. Okay, so I spent 24 hours trying to get back from Boston, and I was basically ready to walk. I mean, I thought to myself, it is almost worth putting like a backpack on my back and just walking because there's a thunderstorm in Newark. And so I was on a plane and it appeared to be, it pulled back from the airport. It pulled back off the gate, as they say. I sat there. I was working away. It pulled back up to the gate. It sat for an hour. The pilot was very frustrated. He got off and then he said, I don't think we're going, even in 2 hours when they tell us that we're going. And I said, when does your crew time out? And he said, we've been flying for a long time already today. So we all waited and then they canceled the flight. There was no more rental cars. There were no more trains because everybody who had not already fled was, see, I am venting. I'm venting. And then I tried to rent a car for today to drive back this morning because they were going to delay my flight this morning. And they did because the plane was in the wrong place. So anyway, I just want to tell you that I am actually in the office right now and you are not. But that is only part of the story, okay? Because my being in the office, it's a whole journey. Now you can talk about like how you've had 12 margaritas.
No. Oh my gosh. So I want to say, I wish that I had that story before I flew last night because we were delayed for the storms as well. We took off at midnight and landed at 3.
Uh-oh. Hold on. What time are you supposed to take off?
7:30.
Okay. I actually am feeling sorry for you now.
No, but you shouldn't. So we were delayed. We took off at midnight, landed at 3. They took us to the one gate at the Miami airport with a non-functioning jet bridge. So we waited for an hour for them to tow the plane to another gate. And meanwhile, I mean, like bedlam was breaking loose on this plane. Like people could not have it. And I'm just sitting there thinking, I'm so grateful that we got here at all because it was not a given. Flights were canceled across the board. And so I wish I could have, had your story to try and put things into perspective for all these people heading down.
Now, hold on. It sounds pretty bad to me to like be on a plane till 3 a.m, then have to wait another hour on the plane for the right jet bridge. So you actually arrived at 4 a.m.
Yep, I got to bed around 5 a.m. So it's been a day, but we're here for a wedding. Last one of the season. I can't tell you the last time I finished weddings in May in a year, which is like amazing. Just the future is just ahead of me without all of this wedding travel. So things are looking up, right. Insane flight delays aside. So I'm great. Things are great.
You're good. But, you do get around for these weddings. Everybody's got a wedding in like Louisiana or Miami or whatever, right?
It is. It's a nice reason to get folks together, though. So I also shouldn't complain too much about that.
Yeah. And so today, let's go on to hardware because we've been talking a lot about hardware around and about these days. And I gave a talk to the firm last week. We have this thing where on Tuesday mornings, I talk about AI to our firm for whoever wants to dial in at 8:30 in the morning. I always end by 9, but I talked about AI infrastructure last week, and it's an incredibly important topic, and it's one that changes. So we spoke about chips many episodes ago. We sort of did an episode on what's a semiconductor chip and all of that. So we're doing something different today. We're really going to talk about chips sort of as types of chips. And so let's get to it.
Absolutely. And, we have also just touched on it so many times on this podcast, right? Because it is a topic that hits on so many important parts about AI, whether it be geopolitics, national security, trade policy, industrial strategy, what have you. So today we can devote a whole episode to the topic and cover the chip market itself along with the policy landscape that sits beside it.
Okay. I just want to say one thing, which is that this episode, I'm afraid, is not going to be the topic of really good cocktail conversation at your whatever bachelor party you're going to tonight or wedding. Because while exciting to you and me, I'm not sure that the rest of the world really wants to hear about chips, except for our audience who is waiting for us to get going. So let's do it. Let's do a quick level set on the basics of chips to remind our listeners. So when we talk about an AI chip, they're usually referring to something called an accelerator chip, which can either be a GPU, which is a graphics processing unit, or a more specialized type of chip or processor called an ASIC, A-S-I-C, which is an application-specific integrated circuit. So regular CPUs, which are central processing units, which are the kind of chips that you have in your laptop or computer, they tend to take steps one at a time, or they process things sequentially for the most part. But AI models require performing lots and lots, sometimes millions of mathematical operations simultaneously, really in parallel. So GPUs, which were originally designed for video game graphics, and which also, by the way, require massive amounts of parallel processing, it turns out that those GPUs have the same kind of architecture that's very useful for AI.
Right. And so that's the GPU side of things. And then we get to the ASICs, which are those chips that are purpose-built for AI from the ground up, like Google's TPUs, which stand for Tensor Processing Units, or Amazon's Trainium chips that take it a step further by optimizing specifically for the type of math that AI models use.
Right. So with the foundation out of the way, let's dig in a little bit more. And of course, we have to talk about NVIDIA, because NVIDIA is the most talked about player in AI chips. And data centers around the world soon, as you know, I'm obsessed with orbital data centers. As soon data centers will be in outer space, they can't seem to get enough of NVIDIA GPUs.
Yeah, and so much so that NVIDIA is estimating that it's going to sell a total of $1 trillion worth of chips based on a few of its latest architectures this year and next year alone.
So think about these numbers, $1 trillion worth of chips. I mean, we didn't used to talk in those kinds of numbers, $1 trillion worth of chips. Anyway, while NVIDIA is strong, there are now other companies that are becoming strong as well. So the landscape is shifting.
Yeah, and I think what's so fascinating about the whole thing is that the shift isn't coming from the usual suspects like AMD or Intel, who are the typical rivals in the chip space. It's the companies like I was just mentioning, Google and Amazon, who are actually NVIDIA's own customers.
Right. The hyperscalers, those like the AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and the model developers, which are also include Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, they are all designing and deploying some of their own custom ASICs. And the reason for that is pretty straightforward. First, there is a desire to reduce dependence on a single chip source. And second, there is a ton of money to be made from selling those chips. Think about what we were saying just a minute ago about the $1 trillion in sales that NVIDIA can expect or is expecting in 26 and 27.
Yeah, for sure. So let's walk through a little bit of what they're actually doing. And so I mentioned Google's TPU, for example, which isn't really a new chip, by the way. They first launched the TPU back in 2016, and their latest generation, called Trillium, which is the 6th generation of the TPU, is available and deployed at massive scale across Google Cloud with over 100,000 chips deployed.
Right. And the point that I made about revenue, so Google is no longer just using the chips for itself. Anthropic announced a deal to purchase up to 1 million TPUs from Google worth tens of billions of dollars to build 1 gigawatt of computing capacity. That's tens of billions of dollars for these TPUs from Google. So think of that. Think of how much revenue Google will be taking in based upon chip sales. And Meta reportedly signed a multi-billion-dollar deal to rent Google TPUs as well. So there is a lot of money flowing to Google for its chips.
Yeah, and these chips that are being put out by customers and hyperscalers are really impressive and performing really well. They're manufactured at the 3 nanometer process, which is where a lot of the cutting edge AI chips still are, though 2 nanometers are being rolled out. And just to provide...
Wait, I don't even know what a nanometer is.
Oh, we're going there.
All right, you're acting like the whole world knows what a nanometer is. I don't know what a nanometer is.
We're going there. Basically, the nanometer measure has historically described the distance between the transistors that are on the chip, right? Those are the things that actually amplify and switch the electrical signals. So when you start talking about getting distance between them smaller and smaller, that allows the chip to run faster and more efficiently. Basically, the smaller the distance is, the more advanced and complex the manufacturing process gets. But, and we'll get to this later, that all has an impact on the export controls that are applied to that tech.
Right. And Microsoft is also making a chip. Let's talk about the Microsoft chip. I mean, it seems like we've now got these major hyperscalers also in the chip business, which I find fascinating.
So Microsoft's Maya 200 chip was announced in January of this year, and that's focused specifically on inference, which is the workload that is actually serving AI to end users, making the models run, right? As opposed to training the models. And they've already deployed that chip in their Azure data centers, and it's being used to power certain OpenAI models, as well as Microsoft 365 Copilot.
Right. And then there's Meta. They made a very significant hardware move in March 2026, revealing 4 generations of its MTIA chips, 300, the 400, the 450, and the 500. And what's interesting about Meta is that all 4 of those chips are built on, as is typical with Meta, open architecture. So there are no licensing fees. And so that is, I find, really fascinating. Those chips, the Meta chips, are being manufactured by the Taiwanese company that has the 4 letters TSMC. And TSMC manufactures about 90% of the world's most advanced chips, like those that we're talking about here. And I just want to pause for a moment as we all think about the geopolitical environment, and people sometimes wonder about Taiwan and the U.S. position vis-a-vis Taiwan, and just pausing on the fact that TSMC, a Taiwanese company, manufactures 90% of the world's most advanced chips. So if you're ever wondering about one of the issues that makes Taiwan so important, think about that.
And I think one other sort of background note that might be helpful there actually is that because we're throwing this number 90% around, and so folks might be thinking, how does that square with talking about NVIDIA and the fact that, you know, they are such an important player in the market and you have all of these other huge players in the market? And that's because TSMC is actually the one that is manufacturing the chips for them. They have what's called a foundry, which makes chips for a lot of different customers. And so moving beyond the hyperscalers, there's also a startup landscape that's specifically focused on chip manufacturing, and that's really worth covering too. And so those are companies like Cerebras, Grok, and that's Grok with a Q, not a K, so to be distinguished from xAI's Grok model, and Samba Nova, and they're all taking novel approaches. Cerebras, I think, has a really interesting one to flag because it's focused on wafer-scale chips, which means single chips with 4 trillion transistors.
4 trillion transistors. 4 trillion transistors at a wafer scale, right?
Exactly. So super, super thin, right? And so what does that actually mean? You have this thin wafer scale chip, right? It's one thin chip that's dinner plate sized. And again, by doing that, the idea is that it allows all of the electricity and signals to move faster across the chip.
Right. And as we know, let's just going back to Cerebras with these wafer scale chips with 4 trillion transistors, it just IPO'd this month.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on top of the Cerebras and its IPO, Grok has secured a $1.5 billion investment commitment from Saudi Arabia to expand delivery of its inference-focused chips. And then Samba Nova unveiled its SN50 chip in February 2026, and they're claiming speeds that are 5 times faster than competitive chips for agentic AI workloads. So there is a lot happening in this space outside of NVIDIA and the hyperscalers that's really worth paying attention to.
Okay, so we've talked about all of the different companies making chips, some of whom are perhaps unexpected, the different types of chips, various ways in which they're architected to move faster, and it's pretty incredible. But, here is a fundamental fact. There is no single country that can fully manufacture and design cutting-edge AI chip independently. And you mentioned just a moment ago that TSMC in Taiwan actually manufactures roughly 90% of, I mentioned that it manufactures 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors chips, but you also then mentioned its foundry. But the supply chain for a single chip, even some of the other ones that we've been talking about, can cross, international borders back and forth over 70 times before reaching consumers.
Yeah, and even so, despite all that back and forth, right, when we talk about the concentration in manufacturing these chips in one place, it creates geopolitical risk for businesses that are relying on the chips for their operations, whether it be AI specific or otherwise, because Taiwan sits 100 or 110 miles from mainland China. So an attempt at reunification and a resulting disruption to Taiwan's chip exports could have a serious impact on global GDP and ripple through every advanced manufacturing sector for years.
And through the AI development world. So the United States has pursued this two-pronged strategy of, one, export controls, which have gotten progressively tighter over the last couple of years. And these controls restrict the export of advanced AI chips and semiconductor manufacturing equipment to China and have a goal of limiting China's ability to develop or run AI models at scale.
And then the second prong of that strategy is onshoring. So through the Chips and Science Act, TSMC is building fabs, which is the semiconductor term for plants, and it's shorthand for a fabrication facility, in Arizona. And Intel received major subsidies to expand its domestic production. And the idea behind all of that is to reduce the nation's strategic dependence on Taiwan.
Right, but how effective have the export controls been in preventing China from accessing the most advanced chips? And actually, I want to pause because that actually has this embedded assumption, which is that China is getting the most advanced chips from the outside and not the inside. We actually don't really know the full picture of what China is able to make itself in terms of advanced chips. But according to a December 2025 analysis from the Council on Foreign Relations, the known, and I want to emphasize that again, the known performance gap between U.S. and Chinese chips is significant and it is growing. But again, we may not have the full picture. The best U.S. chips are currently about 5 times more powerful than Huawei's best offerings, as one example. But that's their known best offerings. And by 2027, the gap is projected to widen to 17 times. But I really just want to suggest that we don't know the whole picture of what's going on in China right now.
And so then I can caveat the other example that I wanted to give by again saying that this is just based on what's known. But another one of China's advanced chip makers, SMIC, is making chips that are at 7 nanometers because of the restrictions that have been put in place by the US and its allies on the actual semiconductor manufacturing equipment used to make the chips. And again, by way of comparison, NVIDIA's chips are being manufactured at 3 and 4 nanometers, which, like I had also mentioned before, is cutting edge.
Right. So we have to be careful not to overstate the impact because if we've talked about before, as recently as just 2 weeks ago, the Chinese models like DeepSeek, Alibaba, they remain very, very competitive. These are high capability AI models, despite what I'm going to call, again, known or expected hardware limitations. And the export controls that have been imposed may have constrained China's ability to produce chips, but they haven't totally stopped Chinese labs from building cutting-edge models. And as we know from Trump's visit to China last week and some of the press around that, there are reports of China making its own very fast chips. We just don't know that much about them.
Exactly. I mean, it's very clear that the Chinese chip-making industry is not standing still.
Right. And, for instance, Huawei's Ascend 910C chip, while less powerful than NVIDIA's offerings, is being deployed domestically in China. And Chinese companies like Cambricon, Baidu, and Kunlun Chips and Byron are all developing alternatives to U.S. chips. Now, by the way, I'm going to spell all those names because while they just tripped off my tongue like I could actually pronounce them, but I don't really know if I did. So Cambricon is Cambricon, Baidu, I know I've gotten right, and Kunlun, which is Kunlun chips, Kunlun chips, and then Byron, Biron, So they're all Chinese companies developing alternatives to U.S. chips. So there is, we know, a nationwide effort within China to make their own chips and to become an independent, have their own independent sources and bypass any limitations that may be being imposed on them. So what are all of our takeaways here, Scott, except that we now know you have scintillating conversation for your whatever parties you're going to tonight for this wedding?
Exactly. I cannot wait. But I can take the first takeaway, which is just that the AI chip market is expanding and players are mixing up. NVIDIA, rather, remains key, but its own customers are taking a role in the chip making market as well.
Right. And I would add as a second takeaway that chips are inseparable from geopolitics. And they are, as a third, inseparable from AI policy, which is embedded with geopolitics. So we've got export controls, geographic concentration, and related onshoring initiatives. And all of these things are defining and are going to continue to define the landscape for AI for some time to come. So there you go. We've given you a lot to talk about tonight, Scott. I want to just, when you're sitting there with that, special designated cocktail in your hand, I want to hear you hold forth about chips.
I am going to go find the bride, and I am going to take up all her time telling her all about semiconductors.
That'll be really just exciting and thrilling. But that's all we've got time for today, folks. And I'm Katherine Forrest.
And I'm Scott Caravello. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Thanks for listening to Paul Weiss Waking Up with AI. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app to stay up to date on the latest in AI policy, law, and governance. For more information on Paul Weiss, go to our website at www.paulweiss.com.